Hi, everyone. This is Derek Harp, the founder and chairman of the Control Systems Cybersecurity Association International, or as we call it, just CSA. CSA is a 501c6 nonprofit workforce development association dedicated to helping grow, support, and sustain the professionals charged with the cybersecurity of control systems. We're specifically talking about those systems that have pumps and valves and actuators, real cyber to physical moving parts, and control nearly every aspect of our modern connected industries. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. It is my hope you find it inspirational or motivating or revealing or informative, and perhaps at times even a little entertaining. Take care and be well.
Hi, this is Derek Harp, founder and chairman of CSA and the host of the CSA podcast show. And I have another fantastic guest on with me today, Roya Gordon. She is the executive industry consultant focused on operational technology, cybersecurity at Hexagon. And so we're super excited to have her on. If you don't know her, she's a prolific speaker in the industry. Some of you definitely have probably heard her talk, but she is in addition to being a speaker, she's a military veteran, a technologist. She's super creative. She is a lover of opera and symphony and travel, and an all-around extremely fun person to have dinner or drinks with. I have had the occasion of doing that a few times. And welcome to the show, Roya.
Thank you, Derek. This has been a long time coming, so I'm really happy to finally be here.
Yes, it is so long overdue, and I'm glad that we're doing it. I think there's just so many different stories I know that you've got in your head of all the things you've seen and all the people you've talked to, and your position is probably, unlike a lot of speakers, your position is probably similar to mine, is you see a lot of things, sort of you're not mired in one particular set of weeds, and it gives you industry-wide perspective. And I've enjoyed that I'm now not focused on just monitoring or some specific thing anymore.
Yeah.
The breadth and depth of our industry, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, there is.
Well, I sort of have a few things I always do. Sort of the superhero joke that cybersecurity people are modern day superheroes, and all superheroes have a backstory. So where do you come from? I know it's you may have been originally from the United States, but you moved around a bit.
I did. Oh my gosh, that question is always so complicated. Where am I from? So born in Brooklyn, but I'm not from New York. I have to make that very clear because I've never lived there. I was just born there, but I'm Jamaican. So I grew up predominantly in Jamaica. And then I'm an Army brat. So my mom was stationed in Germany and I grew up there as a child as well, went to part of elementary school there. And then she came back and got stationed in the US. So I lived in Georgia and then finally settled in South Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Miramar area. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm from in a nutshell. But I call Florida home. South Florida is considered home.
But now you're in Texas, right?
Yes, now I'm in Houston, Texas.
Yeah. So that's you've seen a lot of intimately seen a lot of different very different parts of the world there. I think that military background. And thank you for your service. I know you're a veteran, and I always appreciate that. Having been a veteran myself, I always want to make sure to thank those of you that have done that. And you and I have the Navy in common. So
I see your hat collection is very impressive.
Yeah, a little Easter egg for those that can't see the video. I've got all my covers and hats from my Navy years and the commands I did work with, and so yeah, it's sort of a fun thing at the top of my bookshelf. But not everybody knows what those are, except people like yourself do for sure. Yeah, so we're going to get to that. Let's talk before military. I'm always curious if there's any technology intersection, or early in life before you go out in the world.
No, there wasn't. Like technology was not on my radar at all. In middle school and high school, I was actually in the pre-law magnet program, and I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. So I guess that's how I became such a good speaker, because I was doing mock trials and debate teams and all of that. Yeah. But technology, I didn't get introduced into what that even was until I joined the Navy.
So probably your experience was like mine. I didn't have a technology background other than being an enthusiast, and the Navy was a fast learn quick or drown sort of circumstance technology. Yeah, you were, if I remember right, the intelligence area of the Navy.
Yeah.
And highly technical, lots of systems there.
Yeah, I didn't realize that I got introduced to technology in the Navy until recently, until a couple years ago, when I thought about it and I thought about the different presentations I would give on missile launches and mine warfare and enemy capabilities and radar systems. And that is very technical concepts that I didn't go to school for, but I had to research, I had to learn, I had to analyze it. Then I had to present to commodores and decision makers on what to do. Should we stop off at this port? How do we keep our vessels safe from these forces? And it dawned on me like a couple years ago, like, wow, that is when it started, and I had no idea.
Yeah, I guess that's probably for me too. I didn't sit around and think, oh, I'm doing technology or security. It just
Yeah.
was. It came with the job. But you're right. When I started my first company, I hadn't quite exited the military yet, and it became apparent as a few people, Mike Asante, which many people in the industry know, he and I
Yeah.
served together, and we started talking about cybersecurity, and we realized just how much. Because it wasn't out there as a thing, it was just embedded in everything we did. Security was omnipresent. I was a physical security officer on one of my ships, and I didn't think about that stuff. I just did it, and it was certainly all brand new for me. So there were people around me that knew so much more technically than they. But what a great learning area, and there are so many veterans in cybersecurity, and I think there's some probably a causality there, right? There is such a security culture, which the business world didn't really have to some degree. Some places still don't have.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I just always thought like the IT folks on the ship, it was easier for them to transition into cyber. I never would have thought, like if I was mapping out my career, I was thinking I'm going back into the intel community. I'm doing NSA, I'm doing CIA, FBI, DIA. I wasn't thinking, oh, this is going to be a great transition into cyber. So it just kind of happened naturally.
Well, so what happened? You served for something, what, 6-7 years?
Yeah, I served 6 years. I was stationed in San Diego, so we can just add another place to the list.
Beautiful place to be stationed.
Yeah, even though I was only there like half the time because we'd go out to sea for 3 weeks and then come back for a week, and then we're on deployment and we're doing West packs and Rim packs and all of that. But yeah, I really enjoyed my time out there in San Diego. So when I got out of the Navy, I went back to South Florida and I went to school in Miami. I went to FIU and I studied international relations with a minor in national security studies. And, after that, I was like, what am I going to do now? I started applying for FBI. I was processing, but there was like a hiring freeze. And so I was like, let me just go back to grad school and just kind of figure things out while in grad school. And that's when I decided to do global affairs because I was going to get an MBA, but I was like, okay, let me just kind of stick to this international relations thing because it could really help me break back into the intel community. And on our last semester, we had an option to do a capstone project on a topic of our choosing. During that time, I was processing for the NSA. I had a conditional job offer. So I'm like, well, maybe I should do something on cyber because I'm going to go into this NSA program where they rotate me every couple of months to a different part of the agency. And I don't know anything about cyber or tech. So this is my opportunity to do a capstone project on cyber warfare. And that's what I did. And it was about, nation state warfare. So it was more theoretical cyber, like what is cyber war and how do we combat it? Nothing really technical. So that's kind of how I started getting more into cyber. And then, of course, like in good old government fashion, I graduated from grad school a month before I was supposed to start at Fort Meade. My recruiter called me and said the NSA is rescinding your job offer. We don't know what happened. You have to write a letter, not call a number, not email, but you have to write a letter to this address and mail it in to see what happened. And so obviously, the rug was like pulled from underneath me. I'm like, I've been preparing for this my whole career. What am I going to do now? So yeah, so that's kind of how I got into cyber. The cyber, like the teeth of cyber got hooked into me after studying cyber warfare. And after that, I'm like, I have to find something in cyber now.
Wow, I did not, know that. I love these podcasts because even people I've known for some time, I always learn a ton more about each of you. And what an interesting fork in the road where you could have gone one way, then through. Did you ever determine what was the cause of was it a hiring freeze? Why suddenly something you're so close to doing? Why did they turn that off?
They didn't respond to me until probably 3 to 4 years later. I got a package in the mail. And at that point, it's like, you know what, I don't even care. And it was a thick package of all the people that they've interviewed and what they said about me. And I'm thinking in my head, I had a top secret clearance my whole life. Like, I'm not concerned about people saying anything bad about me. And I still have the paperwork, but I'm like, I'm not going through all this at this point. I already had my first job doing control system cyber at that point. It was just, I already healed from that wound, but it really took a lot to get over. I was really, really distraught after hearing that.
Yeah. I think it's I love it as an experience share and a vulnerable past experience, and I think a number of our guests have been frank enough to do that and share, challenges. Because I think a lot of you look at those of you that are in these highly visible positions and say, how did you end up there? And I think the pattern from all these interviews is, well, I ended up there in a lot of different ways, and not through magic, but just through applying myself, and some things I think that you may touch on as we continue to talk here and see what the ingredients were for you. But along the way, there are hardships and heartbreaks and disappointments, but it's around, persisting and evolving. And so you went, I know where you went next, and you couldn't have gone to them, especially if you go back in time, one of the leading places doing security research on operating technology, Idaho National Laboratory.
Yes. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Like you mentioned Mike Asante, like I was working with, I had no idea the level of influence he had on the industry, who these people were, what was really going on until after the fact. And just, all the work that we done at INL, and I'm seeing it patented now, and there's books and there's research, and they're really collaborating with the private sector. I'm like, oh my gosh, I was at the beginning of that. I was at the forefront of that. And it was also difficult because I didn't have an IT background. I got thrown into OT cybersecurity feet first. And I'm like, I don't know what a network diagram looks like. I don't know what a protective, I don't know what any of this stuff is. So it was very hard. People ask, like, did you go to school for this? And do you have certifications? No, I got hands-on training for 3 years at one of the best places, like you said, to learn this stuff. So it was rough, but I don't think I would have had my career where it is now had I not had that foundation at INL.
Yeah, that makes sense. What an excellent place to go and get your first, real mouthful of, or handful of whatever analogy you want to use, but just sink your teeth into it. I guess that's what I was looking for.
Everyone thought I was crazy though, Derek, because I'm coming from Miami and they're like, wait, you're moving to Idaho Falls? Why would you do that? Just turn the job to just say no. And I'm thinking in my head, I was interviewing for other positions because that's when I started realizing I don't want to do government again. I was in the process for 2 years before I got the offer. I don't have another 1.5 years, 2 years to waste. So I was looking at the private sector and I was like, wait, private sector has intelligence specialist jobs or cyber threat. And I was like, I don't really know what that means, but it seems like I can leverage my intelligence background in the private sector. I saw jobs at Equifax. I saw jobs at Tesla. And it just opened me up to, wow, I can do intelligence outside of the government, outside of having a clearance. So that's when I started looking. And if I could just get into like how I even found INL, because people, they're like, how did you even end up there?
Yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, so I'm applying to all these different jobs and I see a job at INL that says security researcher, and I found it on LinkedIn. I found all my jobs on LinkedIn, so shout out to LinkedIn for that. But it said security researcher, and obviously now I know what that means. I used to be on the security research team at my last job, but at the time I was like, I can research security stuff. I know what security is. I could research and analyze and write papers on security topics. So I applied to it, right? I was obviously not qualified for it. However, and this is where it's important to understand this ecosystem of pulling people into the space. It's beyond just this person's qualified, let's hire them. It really takes the recruiters being able to vet good people. This recruiter saw my resume and she knew I wasn't a good fit, but she still responded. And she said, hey, you don't really meet the qualifications for this role, but there's another part of the lab that's hiring. And just based on your resume, I think it would be a good fit. And I'm so grateful because it took that one person to look past, like, you're not a good fit for this, goodbye, to kind of say, hey, I think there's a match here. And it could be like, wow, someone actually wants to move to Idaho. Let's see if we can cultivate this interest and place them somewhere else. But that is how I got connected to what is now CyberCore. Before it was the Mission Support Center. And they looked at my resume and they were looking for control system cybersecurity analysts. And they really liked my background, my Intel background, my capstone on cyber warfare. And that process was really rigorous. They gave me a 2-week lead time. They gave me a topic of my choosing. I had 2 weeks to write a paper, prepare a presentation, fly to Idaho Falls to present to all of these leaders and directors and my peers. And then from there, they decided to hire me. And what really impressed them was, you know nothing about this stuff, but in 2 weeks, you were able to put together a very solid presentation on this topic. We can teach you anything that you need to know.
Yeah.
You have the analytical skills. You're going to be able to do cleared work. You showcase to us that you're eager to learn. And so that was really how I got my foot in the door. There was no other way I was going to break into OT cyber had it not been for those people that saw the potential in me.
Well, I think you touched on a couple of things that are important. We have a lot of veterans and students involved in the CSA community, and they're always asking, how do I break, into the industry is probably the most common phrase, but it's similar questions that are related to that. Where do I start? Where do I go? What can I join? And so I think the military path, there are a lot of people who are in the service and saying, what am I going to do next? Our industry has obviously got lots of opportunity. There's some things that they might not be thinking about, if they don't have a cyber background, but you had clearance, you had, all the analytical background, you had the degree work, with the specialty focus, and you add all that up, it sounds like it made you an ideal candidate, and they didn't need you to come with, here's all my years in cyber. They were quite happy with what you brought to the table, and that you would then learn the rest on the job.
Yeah, and also the surface and air warfare pins. I remember when I was on the ship and I'm like walking around to the different rooms, and you have to learn about, because from an intel perspective, I had to know about enemy capabilities, but that gave me the opportunity to learn about our capabilities. So veterans that may not have like an IT background or intel background, if they have their pins, that's all very technical. So yeah, just finding out how to leverage your experience and being able to convey it in a way that translates to the private sector, because that's also a challenge within itself of what are all these acronyms and military jargon? What does that even mean to us? But yeah, veterans are really, I'm happy that there's organizations that focus on hiring veterans, because we have a lot of untapped potential. Like we're great candidates for a lot of great roles in cyber.
Yeah, and we're short so many. There was a World Economic Forum report that just came out, and it's a big new number. I want to say it was 8 million. I've got to study the report, empty positions around the world in cybersecurity. And so there is a great opportunity. And as you say, there's just fundamental building block skills that veterans can bring to the table.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what after INL?
So after INL, and I loved it there, but I didn't see myself living in Idaho Falls long term. I was single, and it's like your girl is trying to get married and have children and start a family. And I just didn't really see that being the place that it was going to happen for me. Right. So, I mean, I learned a lot. I did roller derby. I got the name Roya the Destroyer, which it was pretty cool. I went to roller derby skate camp. I skied and then tore my ACL skiing and had to have surgery. But, I had great experiences there. But it was time to look elsewhere. And I started looking around, and I found a job at Accenture. They were looking for someone that did cyber threat intelligence, but for resources. And there's a trajectory here, because this was around 2016 is when I landed my job at INL. And then 2019, I moved to Houston to work at Accenture. When I started, the focus was on power grid, because the 2015 and 2016 attacks on Ukraine's power grid had just happened. So the focus was power grid. Then while I was at INL, I started doing some midstream pipeline security stuff. I got to Accenture, and they were like, we want someone to focus on resources as a whole. So mining and chemicals. So still very industrial. Then after the pandemic, it broadened out to critical infrastructure, because there's pharmaceutical manufacturing, and that ramped up after, like with the production of vaccines. There's auto manufacturing. There's all of these industries that aren't necessarily resources, but they have OT assets. And anyway, so they needed someone that understood OT, that understood threat actors and different types of threats to these systems to be in consulting. So INL, I moved here because, it's one of the energy capitals of the United States. Houston, Texas is a great place for doing this field, because you have all the oil rigs and the different chem plants and petrochem facilities, and there's rail. I mean, there's OT all over the place. And I worked on the cyber threat intelligence team, but I was the liaison from that team to all of our customers, so your oil and gas companies, your chemical companies, your pharmaceutical companies. And I was giving presentations on how threat actors were targeting them. I had a team that was looking on the dark web for threats to all our customers, and I had to give these presentations on all their vulnerabilities. It was such a great role. I really enjoyed my time at Accenture. It was awesome.
Yeah, those roles, from what I hear from many of my friends and colleagues, are just massive exposure roles where you get to see so much variety.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Having that customer experience, so being able to talk to, this is the team from this major Fortune 10 oil and gas company, and I'm sitting in the room with the CISO and the technical team, and I'm telling them about threats to their environment. And then my role was, they called it like a tip of the spear, because obviously Accenture, they sold other security solutions, but we had to start off with, why does it matter? And then I had this threat assessment report that I would present to them saying, this is the current threat landscape, and these are the threats specifically to your industry, and then these are the threats specifically to you that we found. And then it was a great way to kind of usher in the other consultants to say, well, now that we laid out all of these problems, these are the solutions that we can provide that's going to help you address those problems. I really did like that model, and that kind of gave me the foundation to help me do what I do now. That understanding of how we can frame it to the customer, why it matters.
And I can see there's where skills, doing briefings, you'd been doing that many years earlier I'm sure in your intelligence role. And so that's not security specific, the content is, but the method of briefing and how to be concise and how to get the point across in the only amount of time, in the limited amount of time you have, and working with senior folks, senior officers, senior executives, that had to be incredibly helpful.
So wait, I do have to tell you, I have to give the credit to another thing as well. So yes, presenting or being intelligence in the Navy, I had to present like 3 times a day. You had the turnover briefs, then I had to pre-brief with the senior intelligence officer, then I had to brief the commander, and it was a lot. And I mean, I used to have anxiety, because when I did the pre-brief with the SIO, the senior intelligence officer, he would ask me all these questions. What is on this slide? Why do you have that here? Where did this image come from? Can you explain this? And if I wasn't able to answer those questions, then you need to go back to the drawing board. And it gave me, and maybe that's why I'm a little bit of I overdo it, and I'm a perfectionist when it comes to my presentations, because I have to think about all these things. Like, I don't want to have something on a slide that I don't understand, that I can't articulate. So, but the other part of it was, I got into spoken word poetry at a very young age. I started writing poetry in the 4th grade. And then when I was in the Navy, I would go to some poetry events in San Diego, and then I got on the mic, and it was, I used to do it with my eyes closed at first. So doing that, which is a very creative way of speaking, paired with this very rigid military way of presenting, I think it gave me some balance. And then when I got out of the military, I was just full blown to being a spoken word artist is my hobby. So I was doing it at banquets and galas and fashion shows and churches. I was booked and busy, doing spoken word poetry. And I still do it once in a while. It's like a commission thing. If someone asks me and there's a gala coming up and the price is right, I'll do it. And I've done some corporate poetry as well. I've done poetry for Accenture and Nozomi, and and I've customized poetry pieces for whatever they want a message to, so that's also a part of it. I want to give credit to my artistic side as well. So
that's great. I'm glad you brought that up. I didn't know anything about that dimension in your life. That's super cool. And it reminds me of somebody, I think more than one speaker's touched on things that sort of this idea of people, anywhere in their professional journey, but oftentimes somewhere in the middle, and they're like, I want to move, and communication skills are essential. I mean, so many speakers have talked to it. Your example is interesting in you can do things outside of your work professionally that one, you feed your soul and round you out, give you some balance, which I know is something that you've talked about before, but it translates directly back into professional. And so I'm thinking of many episodes ago, somebody talking about Toastmasters, but it harkens to the same concept, right? Go out and do something, and you can gain that speaking confidence and experience, and then that'll probably, anybody that sort of has an eye towards, I'd like to become more senior or in management or talking to management, anything in those areas, communication skills are essential to that.
Yeah. I tell people all the time to hone those soft skills, because I think because I can communicate and present, I think that has helped me get the roles that I've been in, because it's like there's enough people that can do the technical stuff, right? Brilliant people that can code and speak in ones and zeros. But not a lot of people can communicate that value to an audience. That was something I learned at Accenture too, because I would have a team that would do the threat assessments, and then I would be the one presenting it to the customer. And I would sit with them sometimes and say, hey, do you know what happens with this information that you found? And, you know, when I present it, do you know the impact of the deliverable that you're putting together on the broader industry? And they had no idea.
Yeah.
To them, it was just like, well, I'm just doing this one thing and that's it. And sometimes, you know, people have to have tunnel vision. But when I started explaining to them the broader context of things, it made them value what they did more, because they're like, wow, this really is important.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, your background is so diverse. You got military, then you went to, you know, research lab and, you know, quasi government overlap there. And then you went to the big sort of consulting angle, and then you went to a product vendor. I mean, you talk about variety and breadth. You're covering all the bases here. Where'd you go now?
Yeah, and it's so funny because I went from this huge company to like a tech start, like 300 people. When I mean that, I think everyone needs a tech startup experience, because the way that you have to wear multiple hats, there's no like you're in your silo and you're doing your one thing and that's it. You're doing a little bit of sales, a little bit of BD. You're also evangelizing. You're doing white papers. I was also technical editing. I was doing PR stuff. I'm talking to reporters. I'm doing podcasts and interviews. It was quite a rush, to the point where I'm at now, I'm back at a larger company. I kind of felt like I wasn't doing enough. And I was like talking to my manager, and I'm like, am I doing enough? Like, give me a range here. Do you consider me busy, not busy? He's like, no, you're doing great. I'm like, oh, maybe I'm just used to, you know, just being stressed. I think that's what it is. I'm used to being really, really stressed out. But it's also, I like leveraging a team, because I don't need to be the one having the BD conversations. We have a BD person for that. I don't need to do this. Let me introduce you to this other person. So I have more help and more support, which is really, really good. And I'm able to still do very impactful work. So, but yeah, the product vendor tech startup experience, I mean, I feel like that's very necessary in one's career.
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, I know it's out there, so that I'm not, we don't need to hide it. You went to Nozomi, and, you know, that's for an OT, you know, focused or early stage company. I know a number of people there as well, and I think it's another place. I mean, as a career entrepreneur, you know, doing startups now for, oh my gosh, 26 years. Everything you just said, of course, resonates with me, but I think it's true for people who haven't gone to one of those. They don't really realize how they work, and their wearing of many hats comes with that territory, and never enough time. You know, and I suppose everybody probably feels some of that professionally, no matter where they are. There's never enough time, but it's intensified at a less resourced, typically less resourced.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's also, when you're working with great people, it just makes it all worth it. Or maybe it's trauma bonding, because everyone's going through the same thing.
There's some truth to that. I think it comes with the territory. Yeah, I think all that stuff, you know, makes sense. And so now you're at Hexagon. What is your role there? So, you know, executive industry consultant, and it looks like you're focused on OT. Is that true? Is it exclusive focus on OT, or is it?
Yes.
You know, okay.
Yeah, so Hexagon is it's a big technology company. They acquired a company called PAS a couple years ago. It was well known in the space. So lost a little bit of brand recognition there, because now we're under the Hexagon umbrella, and people, they're like, what does Hexagon do? But it's PAS is the capability that I work with. We're not a consulting firm at all. But we do have one consultant that's aligned to a different technology and a different capability, just to kind of aid the team and in your industry knowledge. So they hired me to be the industry consultant for OT cyber and all of our technology and our capabilities in the space. What I tell people is that I've worked my way down the stack, down the Purdue model career-wise, and I kind of want to create an image of this, because I think it's cool. So I started off, at INL, I did control system cybersecurity, but I was writing proposals to the DOE to get funding for protective relay studies. I was building kill chains. I didn't necessarily have to be hands-on dissecting tools. I was focusing on threat actors and threat activities. So I would say from INL and Accenture, I was more high level, understanding those external threats coming into the OT networks and how to protect and secure systems. got a little bit deeper with Nozomi Networks with understanding the tools that we're using and how, like, where these sensors are and network taps and detection. I was on the security research team, so I worked with the threat intelligence team. I was creating attack scenarios that we would use to build demos. And so kind of a little bit more hands-on in an OT environment. Now at Hexagon, I'm still focusing on the cyber element and asset inventory, but there's that automation integrity piece where I'm focusing on the issues that can happen in a plant environment that maybe has nothing to do with the threat actor. It's just configuration change management issues. It's interoperability issues. It's, oh, you forgot to take the maintenance system out of bypass, and now it's not connected and it doesn't shut down, trigger a fail-safe to shut down a process. And I'm realizing a lot of those events happen more than a cyber attack in Russia, China, or whatever nation state in an environment. So I'm literally in the weeds. And I've been in this field for so long, almost a decade, and I'm learning something new. And I'm like, wow, this niche part of cyber, I mean, the rabbit hole goes really, really deep. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now. And I love it. I absolutely love it.
Hey everybody, Derek Harp here, and I just want to take a brief moment to thank 3 companies that make this podcast series possible. The first company is Waterfall Security Solutions, and they led the charge this year for the podcast, and they specifically sponsored it from their podcast, the Industrial Security Podcast. So check that out. That's a great linkage to an entire other series of over 100 episodes. They had their anniversary recently, focused on control system cybersecurity, and they were supported this year by KPMG and Fortinet. We could not do this without them. These companies not only have supported this podcast series this year, but they supported CSA since its very early days 8 years ago. And we're entirely grateful to the teams and dedicated professionals at Waterfall Security Solutions, KPMG, and Fortinet.
Well, so talk about the industry overall. What are you most excited about or most concerned with? You can go either direction. You've seen it now from all these different viewpoints. What excites you the most, and what concerns you the most about our industry, specifically obviously talking about OT or ICS related cybersecurity?
Yeah, so, oh my gosh, there's so much. And I try to share it on my LinkedIn. Like when I have these thoughts in my head, I'm like, does anyone feel this way? Because, so I do like all the regulations, right? But I kind of feel like now it's a little bit of regulation overload. Customers are having an issue with, it's okay when it's NIST and it's a recommendation, or NERC SIP, but now there's the SEC. Now there's CISA, there's all of these other different recommended regulations, and they have to figure out how do they comply. And now with technologies that they have in their environment, they're using the regulations to determine what they want to purchase, which is a smart move. But it's also, it becomes very convoluted because there's not a one-size-fits-all technology for OT. So maybe you have one technology that's going to help you meet this part of the regulation, but not this other part. So now you have a whole bunch of overlapping OT security solutions in your environment because you want to make sure that you touch on all the security controls you might need for SEC or even for cyber insurance, because they have their own set of controls that you have to adhere to in order to get your payout. So I like how there is more regulation, and there's certain industries that have called for more regulation. I was a part of a rail OT security group, and they were like, we need regulation, we need this. So it's not necessarily the government hammering down saying you need to do this. Industry is calling for it, but I think now it's just a bit convoluted. On my LinkedIn the other day, I posted, hey, I'm talking to customers, and they say that they have 3-4 OT security solutions in their environment. They're all doing the same thing. They're all overlapping. What is the rhyme or reason? There's already limited budget. You're fighting with IT and other parts of the business to even get funding for OT. Is the best way to spend it buying multiple overlapping technologies? And so I'm starting to have those kind of discussions because it seems like you said, there needs to be people to understand the bigger picture, to step back and say, this makes sense from this business perspective versus I'm at a vendor and I'm trying to sell you this and I think it's the best thing on the market. And I feel like a lot of customers are falling for the okie doke. They're getting caught up in the RFPs and things sound good. And then next thing you know, you have 3 technologies that do the exact same thing, but you don't have funding to secure the other parts of your environment. Like, what about do you have configuration change management? No, we don't, but you have 3 OT security solutions. So that's something that I'm trying to flesh through with industry experts, and we kind of have this conversation going on LinkedIn. We have some customers chiming in so we can get their perspective. But those are the things that I like to talk about, just things that aren't your typical everyday conversation, but these conversations need to be had.
Yeah, yeah. Oh gosh, that makes total sense to me. People buying things without a prioritization system. Like as a former vendor, and I've told this story so many times, but I think it's probably still true. 10, 12 years ago, being one of the first, security monitoring tools, we could have given the product to many customers, and they couldn't have used it. They couldn't have operationalized it. They had needs way ahead of that tool. They needed people and process,
Yeah.
and so I'm a big fan of the efforts now underway for mathematical, based prioritization. It's like use some math and use some emerging tools and figure out, because you can't do it all, do this next or buy this tool next, but don't just do whatever's hot or whatever just got proposed. That's not a prioritization. That's just in the moment.
And you're right. Sometimes them not having the people, that's a big part of it. I've worked at several companies where they buy the solution, but then no one knows how to use it. No one's utilizing it. And then in their mind, they're like, this isn't helpful. And we're like, no, but you don't have a team. You don't even have one person that's dedicated to logging in. You haven't logged in 3 months, So it's like they need dedicated personnel to use the technology that they're purchasing. And I think, as we see automation, digitization in these OT environments, they're looking for a tool that can, there's AI, like they're looking for a tool that can do what a person can. So when it comes to a SOC, like MDR, tell us how we need to respond automatically. We don't have the time. And in a way, like I see that OT mimics IT a lot, but when you're dealing with like live systems that can't afford downtime, like you can't just digitize and automate the entire space. Like there needs to be humans that are monitoring and that have a control on what's going on. And you have to train these people. I know with all the companies I've worked at, there's been training programs. We'll help you, we'll deploy someone at one of your sites and work with you for a week. We're offering all of these solutions, but they need to prioritize their resources. And that's the other part of it. So you're buying the technology, but you're not well staffed and well equipped to really utilize the technology that you just purchased. So yeah,
for sure.
That's why I love consulting, because I get to talk to customers about this and help them flesh through all of this stuff to make the best decisions for them and utilize all the technology that they have and maybe reduce some redundancy. So
that makes sense, and that's a lot of people need that guidance. It looks like chaos. It looks like chaos. All their options and choices and things they might want to do. And the guidance is typically called for there. So I think let's just go back and say, if you're sitting across the table from yourself at the beginning of your career, what advice would you give? What advice would you give people early in their OT cyber career path, or looking to join our community? Any sort of nuggets? You touched on a couple of things already. But any other thing comes to mind of tactical things? Some of you mentioned and dropped like, oh, go do this, and that's something people can take action on. It's not nebulous. Anything like that come to mind?
Yes, and I was doing all of this on my own. I wish I had someone telling me and guiding me, but there's some things you have to figure out, and that's kind of why I'm happy to figure it out and then kind of share this with other people so they don't have to waste time being frustrated and but I would say to get certifications. And from a person that doesn't have any certifications, I wish, and I still do plan to get certifications, but I feel like I'm so deep into the space now to where it's not a roadblock for me being able to do any kind of work. Again, because of my background, I'm validated in a sense. So no one's like, oh, you don't have a CISSP, you don't have this and that. But I will say, get certifications. You may not need a degree necessarily, but certifications, it just helps people understand your level of understanding in the space. The space is very broad. So if you have a CISSP, if you have a Security Plus, if you have a certified ethical hacker, then people can kind of know, okay, this person will be a good fit here and a good fit there. I would say that if you're trying to get into this field after already having a previous career somewhere else, figure out how to leverage your background and merge it with cyber. I have friends that are in the medical field and they're like, cyber's interesting. I'm like, well, healthcare needs cyber. Look at all these attacks and all these systems that hackers are hacking and these systems run hospitals. You understand how these systems work. You work with these systems on a day-to-day basis, get some certifications, and then your money, you can merge that experience and apply to some healthcare cybersecurity positions. I even tell people that's in a call center, you're probably thinking, okay, you're a call center, how does that translate? There's customer success teams now. With customer success, you don't necessarily need to be that technical person. You just need to make sure you're touching base with the customer. Are they happy? What needs need to be met? Connect with other teams, set up the calls. If you're in call center or you've been running a call center, if you've dealt with customers and the patients, and I mean, it might be a little bit more difficult to do it in cyber because you're talking to people that just spent millions, $500,000, $500,000 on something and they're not happy with it. You have to have the patience to be able to deal with that, right? So get some certifications and try to build that, merge that experience to do customer success. If you're in sales, same thing. So I tell people all the time, you don't have to start over from scratch. You don't have to go back to school for computer science and waste 4 years. Leverage the things that you're already doing because cyber is everywhere. Every industry needs cybersecurity at this. I think that's probably the biggest message that I want to share.
That's awesome note for us to start to wind up on. That's great advice. That leveraging of the non-cyber background, because you're right, there's cybersecurity being applied to every industry vertical now. So if you have industry vertical expertise and you add maybe some missing components to that, you're now differentiated, right? You can go. Yeah. I love that. You can go into the medical field and say, I'm, whether you say it or not, that if somebody looks at your background, like, oh, newer to cyber, but look at all this breadth of experience within medical. You're going to know how the doctors talk or how the system works, or you were a doctor,
exactly.
Or whatever. Yeah, I love it.
With I know my cousin, she's in school for journalism, but she's interested in cyber. And she just didn't think, she was like, I think I have to change my major. I was like, no, we need cyber journalists and cyber media people. There's someone else that was event planners. All the people that are putting together these conferences and making sure the booth is together and the swag, you're touching cyber a little, and maybe that's your entryway into it. And then maybe from there, you can decide what else you want to do. But there's so many ways to kind of get that big toe in the door of this field. So, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, let's, we're almost out of time, and I would love
No, I'm enjoying talking to you. Let's not end it.
But we'll just have to do another one. We'll do part two. I mean, there's no rule against talking some more. We can pick one of these threads you've brought up and dedicate an hour just to one topic. I would love to. So I always like to end the show with what's called the Pivot questionnaire. It was a French show used it, hence the name, and it was borrowed, I think, word for word, as far as I know, by James Lipton, the longtime host of Inside the Actors Studio, which ran for decades. I think he may be still running today, but he has passed on. And but he ended the show asking all the famous actors and actresses that we all know. He asked them the same 10 questions, and so I started doing this a long time ago with my at the end of my interview. If you're up for it, I'll ask you the Pivot questionnaire.
Right, let's do it.
All right. What is your favorite word?
Art.
What is your least favorite word?
Dirty. It's just a dirty word. Like, I just don't like hearing it.
What turns you on, either creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Music, hands down. Like classical music.
What turns you off?
Being late. I'm a stickler for time.
And what is your favorite curse word?
Honestly, Derek, I don't curse. I don't have one.
What sound or noise do you love?
Rain and a little bit of thunder. Yeah, very soothing.
What sound or noise do you hate?
I would say nails on a chalkboard. And it's weird because, I mean, I haven't been in a classroom, but I'll hear sounds reminiscent of it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just want to tear my hair out.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Believe it or not, I can see myself as an art gallery owner.
And what profession would you not like to do?
No offense to the plumbers out there, but I don't think I want to be a plumber.
Yeah, and if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
I have been waiting for you.
Awesome. I'm just wrapping up with Roya Gordon. She is the executive industry consultant for operational technology at Hexagon. An amazing background touching on many different aspects and verticals of the OT cybersecurity space. And a military veteran. Thank you for your service, and thank you for all you do in the industry. You are prolific in your speaking and your willingness to help others, and always fun to run into at any event, anywhere. Thank you for being a bright spot in our community.
Yes, thanks for having me, Derek. Have a good one.
All right. Take care. Be well.
Hi, everyone. This is Derek Harp, the founder and chairman of the Control System Cybersecurity Association International, or as we call it, just CSA. CSA is a 501c6 nonprofit workforce development association dedicated to helping grow, support, and sustain the professionals charged with the cybersecurity of control systems. We're specifically talking about those systems that have pumps and valves and actuators, real cyber to physical moving parts, and control nearly every aspect of our modern connected industries. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. It is my hope you find it inspirational or motivating or revealing or informative, and perhaps at times even a little entertaining. Take care and be well.